when we would treat the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that somebody had because they'd eaten too much sugar, taken too much antibiotics, that was, yes, causing their bloating and, diarrhea and gas and all the reflux, all the negative GI symptoms. When we treated that, it also relieved their brain fog.
Welcome to Commune. We are on a mission to inspire, heal, and bring the world closer together. And I want to get into some of your personal inflection points because I think they're central to the book and your story. But maybe first you can more generally define the concept of state change.
You really did your homework. You really got in there on the book. So yes, we do go way back. You first met me when I was like a kid, as you said, hanging around Skylar's yoga studio. So before I even went to medical school. So a lot has changed. But as I share in the book and as I credit Kula and Skylar in the book, my own personal state change was really what led me to the concept, which was about finding a higher level of energy and focus and clarity and calm and really joy on a daily basis. And that wasn't a concept I grew up with. Health and wellness weren't concepts I grew up with. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, great upbringing, but just for whatever reason in that culture, in that time, 80s, 90s, that just wasn't the thing. And so as I found myself after college, kind of lost working as a paralegal at the U.S. Attorney's Office, feeling deeply that someone should do that job. It just should not be me. I really found through yoga kind of my first state change and that first sort of recentering my body. And actually the first time I really broke through what I call the concrete wall between our heads and our bodies that a lot of people live with and even paid attention to my body at all. And so it was through that experience that I ultimately went to medical school. So big thank you to yoga.
Yeah, I had the office on the second floor of that building on Warren Street. And I know the rickety lime green stairwell is imprinted forever in my memory. But, you talk a lot about that, maybe I'd call it that coffee to wine cycle with a few energy bars in between. And I think this is a very common urban existence and certainly one that I can directly relate to for years. I ran a record company in New York City. I was out late all the time. And then even at Wanderlust, it was a wellness company, but I'm not sure I was always well. And it certainly keeps us productive, quote unquote, that lifestyle. And as you say, fitting into a size small, but I wasn't a size small. But eventually it does take its toll. And, I wonder if you can get into that because we hear a lot about the mind-body connection, essentially how the impact of stress on metabolism or the gut. But I think what's really interesting about this book and about your message is that you highlight something that we don't hear as much about, which is the body-mind connection, essentially how the degradation of our physiology has these knock-on impacts on our psychology. And I wonder if you can untangle that a little.
Yes, it's something that I was living and I didn't realize I was living. And then even though I didn't go to med school to do psych, I trained in internal medicine. It's something that I saw in my training every single day. The ways in which, again, I grew up I'm like an early 80s baby. And so growing up in being the edge of the millennial generation and in 80s and 90s, I think like a lot of us got schooled in that 90s perspective of what health was, which was like calorie counting and, back to that rinse and repeat cycle of wine and coffee and bars. And, my definition of health, as you alluded to, it was like, oh, if I fit into my jeans, like I'm healthy. It had nothing to do with how I felt. And I had that first experience of feeling better through the body. So what I learned then throughout my training is that I don't know that you can always think your way out of how you feel mentally and emotionally. And we live now in a time where the forces around us are pushing our bodies into a state of ill health and dis-ease, right? Disease, dis-ease. And creating forces on our metabolisms, on our gut, on our ability to manage blood sugar, through our diet, on the nutrient base in our bodies that are making us feel really sick. And that sick isn't like, okay, in 20, 30 years, I'm going to have heart disease bad, which is something that's really hard for people to relate to. It's that, and it's how we feel right now. And so I write in the book about something I call core actions, because what I saw in my medical training is that the foods we eat, how we move all day, whether we sit 11 hours a day looking at a screen or not, these things aren't like habits. Like habits is biting your nails. Habits is not what you eat or how you move all day. These things are core actions. They're deeply defining. And again, not just to your health 20, 30 years from now, but to how you feel right now. And to your point, I think we've really missed the message in a lot of cases that what's happening in your body is impacting how you feel in your mind and your emotions. And we have a lot of control over that. And it's very concrete and straightforward, as opposed to something, again, that can feel very esoteric, thought-based, and overwhelming.
Yeah, like in AA, I think they say your best thinking has gotten you here, right?
Yes.
But I think it's a really interesting idea that mood follows action, or thoughts follow behavior. And I've been seeing this concept kind of surface in a whole variety of different ways. Andrew Huberman talks about it. Paul Hawken, who wrote a book about regeneration, talks about it in terms of our actions vis-a-vis the environment. It's actually when you start actually working in concert or in harmony with nature, then your thoughts about environmentalism actually change. It's really interesting concept that mind can follow body, because it's not instinctive almost. And I think this is maybe an opportune moment for you to describe Parsley Health, because I think a lot of information that we're going to talk about could benefit from that substrate, because we're going to get into a lot of physiological mechanism, and I think it would be helpful to have just a foundational knowledge around parsley and your approach to health.
So I started Parsley kind of a reaction again to my medical training. So I trained at Columbia Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. They're awesome, amazing places. I have an incredible foundation in how we think about conventional medicine today. And I saw how valuable that medicine was in that training. But I also saw, especially in my primary care kind of outpatient clinic time, I'd have 15-minute visits and I'd rush through them. And I'd spend 2 of those minutes frantically printing out prescriptions. And in those days, we printed them out and they were 4 to a page. And I would be signing like 4 prescriptions, and I'd be signing 3 or 4 pages, and I'd hand someone this stack of prescriptions, all for things for high blood sugar, high cholesterol, body pain, migraines, autoimmune disease, depression, anxiety, hormone issues, PCOS, infertility, menopause, thyroid issues, all the stuff that most people were living with. And I saw a couple things. I saw that, one, I knew the data said that people would only take about 50% of these medications. So half medication prescriptions are written are never filled. I saw that people would spend this like few minutes with me, get a bunch of refills, referrals to specialists, and they would go see a specialist, and that would take a couple months, and then they'd get a procedure and another drug. And then a couple months later, they'd come all back to me. And that was kind of this revolving door that wasn't getting anyone better. And then I also saw that these diseases I all just described, a lot of people with these conditions, they don't think of themselves as sick, but these are just like the conditions we're living with. And they're all interconnected, and they're all pushing and pulling on each other. And they're highly modifiable or even reversible through what you're eating and how you live your life. And yet those things I wasn't being trained to put on my prescription pad. And so those kind of that like light bulb moment in that 15-minute visit of all of those things led me to pursue training in something called functional medicine, which for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's about really using conventional medicine, like using all the same tools that we have in conventional medicine, but thinking about them a different way and asking the question, why? Let's look at the root cause. Your migraine and my migraine. Yours might be magnesium deficiency. Mine might be stress. Somebody else's might be hormones. Let's ask why and treat that rather than just giving you a painkiller for your migraine. Because the painkiller might help right now, but it's not going to get the migraines to go away. And then functional medicine was also about making that prescription pad, that my like frantic signing, tiny little weenie prescription pad that everyone remembers. Right now it's all online, but very small. It's about making that bigger and saying, yes, we need medications and we need procedures and we need cool testing, but we also need to take food as medicine seriously, because food isn't like medicine, it is medicine. And if you eat the standard American diet, you will get the standard American diseases. And so that was really cool. I learned about functional medicine. I had a pretty good training and foundation in conventional medicine at the highest level. And I said, all right, how do we bring these things together in a way that makes them more accessible, more modern, more fun, like a better experience? Because nobody likes going to the doctor. So how can we make that really pleasant and lovely, and a lot of, online care? And all of that came together as Parsley Health. So I started Parsley as like a bootstrapped experiment in 2015, 2016, but it was like me being the doctor and the marketer and the legal ops, social media manager, you name it. And then, in 2017, really 2018, we raised our first round of outside capital, and now we're a relatively large company. We're nationwide, available online nationwide. We also have clinics in New York and LA, and we're offering this medicine through an annual membership. And so that's what we do.
Yeah, it's such an important service and so timely. And you address primary care in the book in a really interesting way. And and I didn't really understand the pressures that have led to generally how primary care functions, which is what you described as this kind of frantic writing of prescriptions. Because you don't have much time. So you have to condense these visits into 10, 15 minutes. And a lot of that is because of the pressures within the overall systems and structures of insurance and whatnot. And primary care is really, in many ways, sort of the unsung hero of medicine, because and it gets demeaned kind of in medical schools a lot because it's not so sexy. It doesn't get a lot of play in the TV dramas. And it certainly doesn't get, as you point out, the big insurance coverages of heart bypass surgery, for example. So there's all this pressure to kind of turn, clients, patients in and out. But primary care is really the place where you can prevent disease and not just treat it. And where you can help people thrive and not just survive. So it's just so important, sort of the revolutionary approach that I think you're taking to primary care at Parsley. So it's just a great service.
I see Parsley as what primary care should be, but isn't because of the system. It's exactly as you said. We'd rather spend hundreds of thousands of dollars ripping a vein out of your leg and tying it around your heart when your heart is clogged than spend more than 15 minutes with you to try to not just prevent disease, but treat disease in a way that will actually reverse it, which is possible for many of these chronic conditions. I mean, the conditions I listed, they're interrelated, they're multifactorial. Your heart and your brain and your lungs and your gut aren't like in separate, jars sitting next to each other, disconnected, right? That's not how the body works. The body's an ecosystem. And yet our medical system didn't evolve to treat it like that. And it's no shade on the doctors. Like our medical community are filled with highly trained, highly indebted for medical school, caring people who are really smart, who hate this system because running through 1 million patients a day and just sending them prescriptions is no fun and isn't really what you went to school for. And yet the system and those pressures of the system have created it exactly as you said. And so I felt we had an opportunity in the early days to go direct to consumer and offer a service that was much higher touch, longer visits, all the visits in the year included for one flat fee, kind of take away all the friction of the way our system is designed in the model and make it so you could see someone in person or via telehealth. Because if you can call your mom via video, why are you not talking to your doctor? Why are we driving hours to go see a doctor? That's largely dumb. And so kind of just built all that out sort of as my dream scenario for what this new system would look like. And, we sort of digress into Parsley a bit, but the thing maybe one of the things I'm the most proud of is that we have tens of thousands of patients who've been Parsley members over the past few years and are Parsley members today. And we have incredible outcomes data showing that this approach to care, this approach to medicine lowers total cost of care, gets people off of drugs, reduces the need for all these specialists. And it's now proven out in insurance data. And we just launched our first in-network relationship in New York with Aetna like a week or two ago as of this recording. And so I always knew that eventually we'd like plug into the mothership, but we would do it on our terms and in the right way and in a way that didn't stop allowing us to deliver the same level of care. And we've done that. And so we're now expanding that, but like we're officially working with insurance as of 2 weeks ago. So it happened. Here we are.
If you can get to that place where you can write a script for a plant-based, fiber-rich diet instead of a statin, then you can really raise the trophy. I'm there. Yeah. One of the things I love about your book is that you bring a lot back to this notion of energy, and you talk about this sort of siloed approach to medicine, where there's specialists, and we're dealing with these issues as if they're cubbyholed. But if you look at like metabolism or digestion or the circulatory system or the respiratory system, they're actually all involved in actually creating energy in our mitochondria, ATP, etc., through a whole variety of means. And we don't necessarily have to digress into, all of those mechanisms. But that's essentially what we need to do as a human organism to function. We need to optimize our ability to produce energy, and we need oxygen, and we need nutrients, and we need our heart to be pumping that oxygen around properly. We need to be digesting and absorbing nutrients properly, etc. And our hormones obviously need to be ushering that nutrients to the proper places, etc. So all of these systems are completely intertwined. But when there's a breakdown in the system, we stop producing energy optimally. And this can really impact mood and by extension, sort of emotional stability and stress. So you have two diagnoses that I thought were kind of funny. They're not funny at all in reality, but the way you elucidated them in the book, I thought was clever, which are F41.9 and R53.83. What are these diagnoses that seem so utterly prevalent?
Yeah, so these are the ICD-10 codes. So for those of you who don't live in the medical world all day, ICD-10 book. It's like, think of it as like a giant book, but it's every single diagnosis in the United States has a number associated with it. And those two are anxiety and depression. And I didn't start Parsley Health as a mental health service, right? Like we started it to address certainly anxiety and depression, but also the heart health issues and the gut issues and the autoimmune and the, fertility. We do a ton of fertility, preconception, maternity, postpartum work, menopause, all those things, all the physical conditions, right? But what was really interesting to me and what part of why I started, my first ever book was a mental health book, was that we saw that these diagnosis codes were the most frequent codes. And this is before COVID. And then as COVID began, I saw that was only going to get worse. And what I'd also seen in our practice treating so many patients was that when we would treat the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that somebody had because they'd eaten too much sugar, taken too much antibiotics, that was, yes, causing their bloating and, diarrhea and gas and all the reflux, all the negative GI symptoms. When we treated that, it also relieved their brain fog. And it also relieved their chronic fatigue. Or when we did a genetic test for an MTHFR variant and gave somebody a methylated B vitamin instead of a regular B12 and folate, and their chronic fatigue drastically improved, their mood drastically improved, it was like this huge unlock, right? Or when we helped somebody who didn't realize they had high blood sugar, but had high fasting glucose, high fasting insulin, the sort of scourge of modern life today, which is more than 50% of Americans, when we did that, it would help improve their anxiety. Or when we got them on a gluten-free diet, if they were sensitive to gluten, the brain fog and the irritability would go away. And so we had this track record of treating the mind through the body through these really concrete and simple actions. And I found it interesting that we live in this era where like brain fog and depression and anxiety are just so rampant and everybody's writing books about them. And, it's impacting the workforce and all of this stuff. And it's like, if you sit all day staring at screens and eat sugar, you are going to feel fogged, depressed, and anxious, and you're not going to sleep well. So you'll have chronic fatigue. And there's just kind of this denial in general about the role of our bodies play in our mental health. And I'd seen so many people unlock their way to greater clarity, joy, focus, purpose, that even though, again, I never set out really to create a service that was focused on mental health, it's become so much a part of what we do because we don't separate the mind and the body arbitrarily. We don't put them in separate jars. That, 20% of our members come to us for a mental health issue now. But that was really organically derived out of us treating physical issues and then impacting these mental health issues so profoundly.
Yeah, well, let's get into some more specific mechanism around that. You in the book, you list, I think it's 5 primary contributors to emotional stress. So I'd like to unpack each contributor and untangle how each of them sponsors anxiety and exhaustion, and then how we can leverage them to induce state change. So you list diet, movement, or lack of movement, technology, sleep, and misuse or abuse of drugs and alcohol. And we can get into that distinction. But maybe let's just start with diet, because that's the elephant in the room for me anyways. How is our standard American diet connected to emotional stress?
A few ways. So first of all, our diet is like 90 something percent ultra refined, and most people are living on processed, packaged, refined flours and refined sugars that are glued together with omega-6 vegetable oils. That's kind of what people eat. And even those of us in the health and wellness industry, I was at the airport last week and I saw a green juice, and I always love to like look at the green juice labels. This is at like a Starbucks or something, and a standard airport coffee place. And the green juice had 58 grams of sugar in one little bottle. And that's almost 3 times what we should have in a day. And it's being sold to us as a health food product. And so people don't have no idea just how much refined carbs, cookies, cakes, breads, pastas, crackers, anything that comes in a bag or, that you have to pop open that sits on a shelf. And simply by eating those foods, a couple things happen. Number one, we create metabolic disarray, and eating one of those foods or one of those sugar bombs is like throwing a grenade in your stomach. Sugar goes up, insulin goes up. Insulin goes up, and we get a whole cascade of hormonal dysfunction. Testosterone goes up, then testosterone is converted into estrogen. So you get all the PCOS and the infertility and the endometriosis and all of the issues that female health issues, men too. That cycle disrupts the immune system and makes it harder for the body to heal and fight off infections, which we saw in COVID. One of the biggest risk factors for dying of COVID was diabetes. Not a judgment, just a fact. And that high blood sugar state, when prolonged, meaning it's every day, not just a once in a while, leads to chronic inflammation in the body, and that inflammation shows up in the brain, and that brain inflammation is correlated with anxiety and depression in the literature. So that's one, is the sugar factor. Another one is eating all those foods shift who lives and who dies in your gut. So we can take all the fancy probiotics we want, but who lives and who dies in your gut is mainly defined by what you put in your mouth every day. So your, plant-based high fiber diet is going to grow one set of bugs, and your highly refined sugar alcohol diet is going to build another cohort. And the cohort that eating a lot of sugar builds is one that is not so good at maintaining our gut lining integrity, and it's not so good at maintaining a healthy balance of neurotransmitters like GABA and serotonin. People don't realize that 95% of the serotonin in your body is in your gut, not your brain. And that bacteria that live all over us, but especially in the gut, have a really big role in translating what you eat into chemicals that impact how you feel mentally and emotionally. And so that's the second way. And then the third way is back to that, omega-6 oil glue. So people are like, omega-6, omega-3, what does that mean? Well, omega-6 fats, we need some of them. We should be eating about a 4-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. But in this country, on average, we get a 26-to-1. And where's that coming from? So that's all your vegetable oils, your canola oils, your grapeseed oils. These are the sort of processed food fats, or the fats at the to go, bar at the deli or the bodega or wherever you're buying from, even the health food, quote unquote, grocery store. And these fats interrupt our brain's ability to use the serotonin we have, and also lead to further neurological inflammation. Meanwhile, you need those omega-3s because your brain is built of about 70% fat. So you need those healthy fats to build a healthy brain. So that's a lot of science, but I walk through all the science in the book because I've found with patients over the years that when you teach people the why and you help people understand the science of what's happening, especially when it comes to food, there's a lot of shoulds in food, especially for women, and a lot of good foods, bad foods, judgments on foods, shame around food, emotional relationships to food, sense of punishment, all these things. But when you put that aside for a second and you just understand the science of food and how it interacts with your body, people get really psyched. Like, they get interested, and anyone can understand this basic stuff. So I cover it really simply in the book. And when you understand that science of what the sugar is doing in your body, how it's impacting your microbes, how the fats are interacting with your brain, you can kind of get out of that should mode and into that, oh, I want to eat an unprocessed, highly plant-based whole foods diet because I know what that other stuff does to me. I understand it now. I can see it in my mind's eye, and that's really powerful.
Yeah, it's so funny that you bring that idea up, because on page 123, I have underlined that very concept. And I won't read it back, though I had planned to read it back just because you already said it. But when there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of slogans, there's a lot of aphorisms and adages, there's a lot of Instagram memes about what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. But when people start to actually understand mechanism, behavior changes. Because when you know what is happening in your gut or with your metabolism, it's hard to deny certain kinds of the impacts of certain kinds of behaviors. So, I mean, this has been true for me. The more I learn about my own body and my own physiology, the easier it is for me to adopt different behaviors and optimize my health. So I have a couple questions and just a few ideas related to diet and blood sugar. But first, I'll start in the microbiome or in the gut, because I don't think a lot of people know that how much serotonin is produced in the gut, and serotonin is also a precursor to the production of melatonin, which we'll get into around sleep. And melatonin is also a very, very powerful antioxidant. So much happening in the gut, and as you say, when we consume too much refined sugar and grains and processed foods, what we're really doing is pushing ourselves into dysbiosis and eventually intestinal permeability, which is leading to chronic inflammation, etc. I have another kind of question for you, more specifically about hyperglycemia, essentially the prevalence of glucose, high levels of glucose in the blood. So obviously we need some glucose to make adenosine triphosphate in our cells. Insulin obviously picks up glucose in the bloodstream and tries to usher it into the cells. But when we have too much, because we are either scarfing down too many Twizzlers or sodas, or we become insulin resistant for a whole variety of reasons, and there's too much glucose in our blood. What happens when there's too much glucose in our blood?
Oof, so many things happen. on the, on the most basic sort of version of that, right? It's that when your body has like a really narrow range of what is too cold or too hot in terms of the amount of sugar in your blood. Too little, you're going to get shaky and pass out, right? The body doesn't want that. Too high, basically the same thing is going to happen. And so your body has to keep you in a really narrow range in order to function. And so when you eat a load of sugar, your body pumps out another hormone, or a hormone called insulin, whose sole job in life is to take the sugar that's floating around in your blood, and if it stays there, is really toxic and damaging to you, and to put it into cells where it gets stored largely as fat, or sometimes for like very temporary immediate use. The liver stores a bunch of sugar for kind of immediate get up and go. And that, when your body has to day in and day out fend off this like onslaught of sugar, and then your insulin goes way up because it's like, oh my God, I'm going to die. I got to get the sugar out of my bloodstream. I got to hide it and put it in a safe place in my cells. Over time, your pancreas, which is the organ in your body that makes the insulin, literally burns out and can't make the insulin anymore. And what also happens is that those cells, whose job it is to like take in the extra glucose and get it out of the blood, those cells get full effectively, and they get kind of insensitive, which means like if your mom is yelling at you to clean your room over and over again, eventually you tune her out. The cells kind of tune out the insulin and are like, I'm done putting more sugar in here. And then that leads to high blood sugar that has nowhere to go. And then we basically frost all of our insides like frosted flakes with sugar. So people get that test called hemoglobin A1C, and they're like, what's that? It's this funny group of letters and numbers. I don't know what that means. It says I'm, have metabolic syndrome, but I don't have diabetes yet. What that test is a measure of the level of frosting on your red blood cells. And when your red blood cells are frosted, you gum up and clog up lots of little blood vessels, and that's how people go blind or lose feeling in their feet or end up long-term with amputations. You can't use oxygen as well. And back to the point about energy, without kind of going like super deep into Warburg and that whole world, which I'm a big nerd about. The reality is that your cells, when inundated with sugar and the subsequent oxidative stress that the sugar creates, your cells have a really hard time making as much energy, ATP, and your mitochondria don't work as well. Like nothing works as well. Basically, it's like, here I am walking through my day, trying to like, take care of my kids and go to work and send a zillion emails, as is like my life, right? And Slacks and so forth. And imagine I'm doing that, but I'm carrying like 100-pound backpack on, and I have to do all the same thing. Am I going to do it as fast? Am I going to do it as well? Am I going to feel good? Am I going to get a giant headache? Yeah. So that's what sugar does. And so I think we've sort of been misguided when it comes to blood sugar, and there's a lot of attention to it now in terms of like, okay, use a continuous glucose monitor to kind of monitor your ranges. And that's great. That's an awesome kind of cue. But I don't think that we've really bothered to educate anyone on like what's happening in your body when all this sugar is around. And I find that when you do, people think like, ick.
Yeah.
I don't want that. And no wonder I feel like crap. And I have brain fog all the time because my lunch consists of coffee and a sandwich and a bar and a whole bunch of processed stuff that is making my cells, it's like putting an 80-pound, 100-pound weight on each cell while it's trying to make energy for me.
Yeah. And I mean, this process of glycation, of essentially glycoprotein formation, and I think what a lot of people call advanced glycation end products, these where there's too much glucose sitting around in the blood and it'll fuse with like a protein like hemoglobin, which will then create a tremendous amount of inflammation in your vascular system. And, we look at some of the downstream impacts of that heart disease and stroke, which are, I think, the number one and maybe number 4 or 5 killers in the United States. For a long time, we've, blamed cholesterol for that. But when we actually look upstream, there's some other contributors to inflammation in our vascular system. So it's just, it's so important, the work that you're doing about educating people around this. And I wear a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, because I'm a little bit farther down the rabbit hole than the average Joe. But it's been really eye-opening for me because, instead of getting a snapshot with a hemoglobin A1C, even though that's a kind of average over maybe a few months, but just to get that once a year at the doctor, I'll probably just disregard it. But, day to day, I've been really interested at least in, hey, what am I eating that's spiking me? What other behaviors am I engaging in that's spiking my blood sugar? And how can I empower myself and have the agency to, change my habits, or not habits in your, as you say, my systems. Because we always fall to our systems at the end of the day. Maybe we can talk about movement a little bit. You have a great quote in the book. I think it's, your issues are in your tissues. And maybe you can just address the importance of movement, and I suppose the importance around the lack of movement as it contributes to emotional stress.
So your issues are in your tissues, but there's actually science behind that little quip, which, could just be cute for Instagram, but can get dismissed, I think, too easily. And, the Body Keeps the Score is the original book on this. And so I'll credit that. But it was also really fun in writing this book to kind of dive into the research of exercise and mental health, because a lot of studies have shown that exercise regularly will improve anxiety and depression in 95% of patients, where psych drugs, while valuable tools, certainly only work for around 50%. And so it was awesome to kind of dive into the fact that as a psych and a medical community, we should be prescribing exercise first for anxiety, depression, brain fog, insomnia, and that the research bench there is so deep and so proven and so long that it is really, I think, malpractice not to do that. And so that was really cool to kind of reaffirm, because I kind of, these things when you go to medical school, but then to really dive into it was awesome. And then I think for all of us to understand, well, why is that, right? Because again, I always come back to the biology and the physiology and the why. Your body was designed to process emotion through movement. And that's how we process and clear our emotions. And so we, on average, sit 11 hours a day, and we're having emotions hundreds, if not thousands of times a day. And so what happens when you have an emotion? Because emotion isn't just a thought, and it doesn't just live in your head. I might have a thought that, I'm really pissed at this person, or, oh my gosh, here I am on the Commune podcast and I'm kind of nervous. Am I going to do a good job on this, super high profile podcast? And I might not even see that thought as if it's not like I'm reading it on a TV screen, but I might have that thought so fast. It's comes and goes in an instant. I don't even register it, but I have an emotional reaction to that thought, which is anger or fear, anxiety. And then when I have that emotional reaction to that thought, I kick off a wave of neurotransmitters and hormones throughout my body, and that hit every single cell in my body. And that wave can take upwards of 48 hours to completely go away. And so imagine that wave is happening hundreds of thousands, or if not thousands of times a day. If you're running from a lion, which is your email, or you have a lot of stuff going on. And now you're impacting your blood sugar, you're raising your cortisol levels, you're increasing high blood pressure, high blood sugar, you're increasing your resting heart rate, you're disrupting your sleep, you're shutting down your digestion. And this wave impacts even your cellular integrity and your cell's ability and your immune system's ability to fight off disease. So when we say the body keeps a score, emotions live in our tissues, that is the mechanism by which our emotions impact our tissues. So I'm sorry, someone's coming to bring me a charger, but I just waved them away. I don't need that. And so, and so when we move our bodies, when we dance or when we run or when we sweat or when we do yoga, or someone gave me crap for not talking about, I'm like not a Pilates fan, but like I didn't talk about it in the book. And so for all of you Pilates people out there, it's like, there's no hatred for Pilates. It's just like not my thing. But for those of you who are like, I hate yoga, I'm like, fine, I get it. It's cool. But it's not, in that sense necessarily about a particular type of yoga. It's about moving this wave of neurotransmitters and hormones through our body and processing them so that they don't essentially sit around and create damage. And so that was really cool to research and understand. And it comes back to, just like with food, we've sort of thought of exercise as a punishment or a should, or it's about looking fit and being hot. And we've lost sort of that knowledge that exercise is there to make us feel good, not, again, 20 years from now, but right now, regardless of your weight, regardless of how you look. And I think that's really important for people because it's this tool that's largely free that we have right at our fingertips to massively transform our mental health every single day.
Yeah. And you recommend two primary kinds of movement, right? A more aerobic style movement, and then I think what you call maybe controlled movement. Can you break that apart?
Yeah. So I talk about a couple types of movement because I'm a really big fan of variety. And what I usually get when I see a patient is somebody who's doing one of three. They're maybe like just doing yoga, Tai Chi, the stuff that is really great for stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, allowing your body to calm, giving you a sense of your body in space, which is called proprioception. So that's actually really good training for your brain for balance and for awareness. Certainly building core strength and other things, but they may be just doing that, or they're just doing cardio. They're like living on their spin bike, or they're running. And they're kind of missing some of the dynamics of the other types of exercise. And so we try to get most people on a balance of yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, things that build proprioception, build core strength, and calm the body, with cardio, some amount of cardio or HIIT that's going to really rev up your heart rate, build that cardiovascular health, because that impacts brain health and cognitive function in a really big way long term, and also helps you build muscle, which is really important for insulin and sugar balance. And then weight training, which is also really important for cognitive function and has been really shown to ward off some of the dementias and Alzheimer's that people are getting so frequently later in life, as well as balance blood sugar today, as well as give you more energy. And what I often find is that, especially women, they're often skipping the weights. And they are afraid of bulking up, or it just hasn't been something that they've gotten used to doing, or I don't know, it's, not every woman, but it's more frequent in women. I think it's just sort of culturally impressed upon us. And so, I really try to get people doing some sort of strength and resistance training, some sort of yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, sure, Pilates people, you can throw that in there. And all the Pilates teachers are going to come after me. Pilates is great. But, and then some sort of cardio on a regular basis in order to build peak mental health and to do stuff that, you can do 10, 15, 20 minutes of weight training and be in and out and get a great workout. Whereas, for cardio, you have to do it a little bit longer. And I know for a lot of people, time is a big sort of barrier to movement.
Yeah, I think our sedentary culture is very, very tied to another culprit that you underscore, which is technology, right? Can you talk a little bit about our irrational relationship with technology and how that can have some pretty negative knock-on impacts?
Yeah. Mobile device addiction is a diagnosed condition. And so it's real. And I think we've essentially been hijacked by our news feeds and our social media platforms. And we're not going to throw our phones out the window. We got to shop. We got to call people. We have to do work. We have to interact. But people go from screen to phone to screen to phone for social, for commerce, for work, for every single thing that they're doing. And, These devices have been shown not only to deplete gray matter in your brain and to lead to inattentiveness, but they're also leading to anxiety, depression, and really big self-esteem issues, especially in women and in younger adolescents. And that's all just fact. And so, and then there's an impact on sleep, and that's really clear. It's not just the blue light, it's the actual stimulation from the content you're consuming that's interrupting your sleep and leading you to feel foggy and not rested the next day. And so I'm like not a doom and gloomer. I'm kind of like a what do you do about this? And so I really recommend setting some real limits. And so, limit all your apps for max an hour a day. It's really easy to blow through that. Don't look at screens before bed. Have an hour before bed, which is your meditation, your bath, your prepping food for the next day, your like analog hour. And really be mindful of the degree to which these platforms are having impact. One of my patients I write about in the book had a history of anxiety, and she was somebody who was what's called a non-responder to medication. So her psychiatrist and I had tried, and none of the meds had really helped her. And she had really pretty severe anxiety that was keeping her up at night and interfering with her job, her ability to parent. And she'd gotten into a really good place with it for a while. And then it had kind of reared its ugly head again. And she really wasn't sleeping to a degree that was, frankly, dangerous. And so we went through all the things, the movement, the food, that we know the drugs didn't really work. She was developing some dependence on like the Xanaxes of the world. And I kind of did a rescreen of her day, and I realized she was spending like 6-7 hours a day on social media and news, because this was in pandemic. And so we decided to do like a 1-week detox. And I was honestly skeptical of my own plan, because I was like, this is a little bit of a Hail Mary. Like, is this going to work for her? We got to do something. Like, nothing's working. And she did it. And she ended up sticking with it for a month because she started sleeping again and her anxiety completely dissipated. And so I think we sometimes discount the degree to which these platforms are creating real emotional upheaval in our lives. And so I call attention to that in the book and the science of it, and then what, of course, you can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're always asking the question why. You're always moving upstream, because the symptoms may appear for myriad different reasons. And I mean, I'm no doctor, but I can get amygdala hijacked by my social feeds, and I have certain insight into what's actually happening when I'm having sort of a sympathetic overload response to some invidious comment on social media. And I know that my body is being filled with cortisol and epinephrine. And, those neuromodulators can be useful at times, for alertness and focus, et cetera. But you certainly don't want them on a chronic basis. And you probably don't want them later in the evening. And, obviously that also ties into blue light and technology, because we have these circadian rhythms that are built in, are wired in. And, we have natural cortisol release in the morning. And then when everything's working, natural melatonin release, in the evening. And when we disrupt that pattern, we can really suffer. And I think that bridges somewhat elegantly into sleep and the necessity of sleep and how little sleep our culture actually gets. So can you actually maybe take a little time to unpack what happens when we sleep, and why is it important for mood and emotional stability?
So your nighttime and your sleep and your deep sleep is when your brain takes out the trash from the day. So imagine living in your house and like literally never taking out the trash, and your entire living room filled with trash. Like, you couldn't function in your home. So if you're not sleeping, that's, dramatic, but that's effectively what happens. Your brain actually shrinks at night and washes itself, and it takes out the metabolic trash from the day and heals itself. And your brain cells that are responsible for the cleanup crew and the immune system of the brain are active in that nighttime. And so if you're maybe sleeping a certain amount of hours, but you're not getting quality sleep, your room is too hot, it's not dark enough, it's not quiet enough, you're having an agitated sleep because you've been looking at all those news feeds and social platforms up until bedtime, or looking at your email. Even if you had the blue light, filter on, it doesn't matter. It's the content, right? Or if you've had alcohol, which disrupts your body's ability to reach a lower resting heart rate and lower body temperature that's required for you to be able to reach those REM cycles that allow your brain to then take out the trash. All of that leads you to feel unrested the next day. And then what happens is, and this is well established, people they're looking for energy. Back to our comment about energy. They feel like crap. So they drink too much coffee. They eat sugar to try to keep going. And that leads to this really horrible rinse and repeat cycle, because the sugar and the coffee during the day will keep you up at night. Most people, 60%, are a relatively slow caffeine metabolizer. So we all know those people who can have like a coffee right before bed and go to sleep. My husband's one of those people. It's so infuriating. I don't understand it. I don't have any caffeine after 9 a.m. And because I'm a slow metabolizer. And so when you get in that cycle, it can be really disruptive. And then chronic sleep deprivation or chronic poor sleep quality can really mask as depression. And so for a lot of people who are experiencing chronic low-grade depression and anxiety, sleep is one of the number one culprits. And I'm not talking about, of course, something like a bipolar disorder or a schizophrenia disorder that doesn't have its origins certainly in sleep. However, what I will say is that anyone who does have one of those conditions, not addressing sleep and having sleep also be a factor, not addressing movement and having a sedentary lifestyle also be a factor, not addressing food, having the standard American diet that makes you sick also a factor. These things will impair somebody with bipolar, with schizophrenia, with any of this more, severe psychiatric illnesses. It will basically block you from making some progress, right? It makes everything harder. So sleep is really vital. And I think most people need 8 to 9 hours, not 7 to 8 is what the research shows. And getting that dark, cool room. I wear earplugs, eye mask, room at 67. I still hear the baby screaming. So, for all the moms who are listening, I have a 6-month-old. Like, if he whimpers, he'll just go back to sleep. If he's actually crying, I'll still hear him. And so, I do that so that I can make the most of the hours I'm getting, even though for me right now, sometimes my nights are interrupted because I have little kids.
Yeah, I mean, sleep has always been my Achilles heel. And of course, as I began to learn more about how important it is around cognition, both memory consolidation, but also learning, it's often where learning codifies is during sleep or deep rest. I really had to take some extra measures to make sure that I was getting enough sleep, and I'm doing better in general, although I'm officiating my brother's wedding on Friday and I've been churning over it
That's exciting.
over the last couple of nights. But
there's a great example. So instead of churning, right, because you have this big day and you have probably a big toast to give, we're all going to, and I'm sharing this because I get this feedback a lot, or people ask about this a lot. It's like, but I have so much going on, and there's a war going on, and there's a pandemic going on, and there's, my brother's wedding going on, and there's always something. And so one of the things that we need to learn, and I don't need to tell you this, I know you know this, but it's like, okay, so how are you processing that information? You have to digest that information like you digest a meal. So if you do have something like that, that's really kind of spinning you out, and I have those things all the time. I mean, startups are nonstop fires. You just wake up to 99 fires, you put out 36 of them, and you wake up to 99 more the next day. That's just life for years now. So, okay, I need to then get out of bed, or before I go to bed, sit and meditate and like allow my brain and my emotions, allow myself to feel my feelings, and allow my brain, have a practice like meditation or like breathing that allows my brain to digest that stuff before I go to bed. Because most people don't, myself sometimes included. And then you like slam into bed and you're like, okay, sleep. And that's clearly not working for anybody.
Not at all. I mean, obviously, there are many practices that have been designed to focus one in the present moment, because so much of our emotional stress comes from either taking trauma of the past and projecting it into the future, or stewing in anticipated memory. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and of course, when we're practicing like a Vipassana practice, for example, which is the practice that I know that you engaged in for at least 10 days in Bangkok, we're just seeing phenomena, thoughts, emotions, sensations, sounds arise and subside in consciousness moment to moment without judging them or assigning them any salience or any valence. And, this is a practice. And the more you do it, the quote unquote better you get at it. And it can really relieve a tremendous amount of suffering day to day. And I'm certainly not perfect. I try to meditate 5 or 10 minutes a day at the minimum. But when you develop this kind of system, again, you fall back on your systems. So if you do have that rough night, where you wake up and you're roiling over something, then you have a go-to proven practice that you can rely on to provide yourself with some relief, and really get the sleep you need for, restoration and all the reasons that you described. I mean, there's this whole glymphatic system, which, cleans out beta amyloid proteins that are associated with dementia and Alzheimer's, all this kind of stuff that we're learning. So, I can't stress that enough.
Yes. You use the technical term for the washing machine that cleans out your brain, which is what I call it.
Yeah. I mean, as I get more into this stuff, I get a little bit more fluent with the terminology, and I try to pass that along on this podcast.
I was really nervous for this podcast because I was like, oh God, he knows more than I do about some of this stuff at this point.
I don't. I do.
Down the rabbit hole, which I deeply appreciate. I'm like, let's bring it up here to, the average, not quite yet a biohacker, but I love it.
Yeah, well, it's just for my own vanity, because I interview so many brilliant doctors like yourself that I can't allow myself to be embarrassed. So I end up reading, 3 or 4 books a week on this stuff. And I always tell my dad, I feel like I'm going to med school as a podcast host. Okay, in respective time, I'll just, finish with maybe just a question or two. I think, one of the key things to health and taking agency over your own health is actually understanding some of the biomarkers that are most important. And I think one of the things that functional medicine does so well is that it really focuses on diagnostic testing. So if there were 4 or 5 key diagnostic tests that you would recommend, so people can get a sense of their holistic health, what would they be?
I wrote them down in the book. So if you buy the book, people, you can literally, screenshot the page or rip the page out and take it to your regular doctor. Or of course you can come see us, virtually at Parsley, because we're nationwide, but we'll do these tests as a matter of course, and a lot more. But we have a reactive healthcare system, not a proactive one. And I see people all the time who are not getting the basics. And so the basics that I cover in the book are looking at blood sugar. So not just hemoglobin A1C, but fasting glucose, fasting insulin, looking at markers of inflammation, chiefly ESR, HSCRP, and in some cases ANA, which can tell us if you have maybe some autoimmune beginning or going on. We look at nutrient levels. So vitamin D deficiency can mask as depression. We look at our B vitamin levels. A lot more people are deficient than they realize, or are suboptimal, if not truly deficient. We look at thyroid a lot. 1 in 5 women will have a thyroid issue in her lifetime, and it gets missed all the time because the standard medical community doesn't do the right tests and doesn't look deeply enough. So we're looking at not just your TSH, which is kind of the number one sort of beginner level marker of thyroid function, but also free T4, free T3, the antibodies to thyroid, which are thyroglobulin, anti-TPO, because you could have low-grade autoimmune thyroid disease that's impacting thyroid function before your TSH actually goes up. And so that gets really missed a lot. And low thyroid function, by the way, shows up as depression, weight gain, constipation, fatigue, dry skin, number of other symptoms. And so, I can't tell you how many times a woman is told she's depressed when she realizes the thyroid disorder. And in those cases, like not all the Zoloft in the world is going to make a difference in her depression. We got to treat the thyroid. So those are a few of the markers that I recommend people look at, looking at some basic heart health markers. Women, especially, heart disease has gotten really underdiagnosed and can be measured early and measured also through markers like, again, hsCRP, homocysteine, as well as some of the cholesterol markers. And so without sort of rabbit holing too much on testing, the tests I just shared are basic. You can go to any LabCorp request, any doctor can order them. If your doctor's not ordering them, they should have. If you're 20 years old and you haven't had these tests, you should have. Most kids today have metabolic issues, are starting to have high cholesterol issues and have nutrient level issues. We started a pediatrics program at Parsley because so many of our members wanted us to see their kids. And the same stuff that's happening in the adults is happening in the kids. So these tests are basic. They're usually covered by insurance. They're not expensive, and make sure you're getting them. That's a really big message that I have to anyone listening, because I think a lot of people listen to these amazing Commune podcasts and are really sophisticated in terms of what they're listening to and learning and reading. And I will see those same people not have testing done. And then I think the other important piece of this, and I'll get off my soapbox on testing, but it's like, it's not enough to get tested once. You got to then change some stuff and get tested again. And some of the direct to consumers, like at home tests, are okay, but a lot of them are not, as accurate. They can be for certain markers, but like a fasting glucose isn't going to work on an at home test. So you really need then also to hopefully see a provider who's not just giving you a number back, but who's telling you what the number means and what to do about it.
Awesome. Well, Robin, there are so many other questions that I'd love to ask you, but we'll cubbyhole them for part 2, if I can tempt you back. I want to talk about fasting. I want to talk about supplementation in some greater detail. And it's interesting because I went plant-based about 8 months ago. And so when I was reading the book, I had a lot of questions about, where I might be deficient. And of course, this comes up in testing too, but just things around vitamin B and the diaspora of B vitamins that are important. And then really omega-3s, because that's an area where you can get it through, to some degree, through a plant-based diet, but it doesn't really convert at very high levels. At least that's what I read in your book.
Yes,
so I've got to find ways.
Eat real fish oil. Don't do the plant-based omega-3s if you're open to it, because it makes a really big difference, especially if you're pregnant or getting pregnant. Please, please, please. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in and I'm doing it. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this interview from the Commune podcast, then click subscribe and check out this video right here.